I gotta hit on this. I think we hit on this every time you're on, Frank. You alluded to it a little bit earlier, but you've many times said, and I think many people may be surprised by this that are invested in this ecosystem, but you've talked about being 99% in PulseX. Obviously, PulseChain, Pulse is the actual gas token of the ecosystem. PulseX is the DEX that Richard commissioned of the ecosystem. And then, of course, a lot of people obviously are in Hex too. But I am curious, why is PulseX what you are the obviously most bullish on? I mean, I think maybe people have a lot of suspicions that, it is deflationary in nature. Like it's the only DEX in humankind that has that buy and burn turned on, where we see the tokens get burned whenever trades happen. We've had 6% of the PulseX supply burned away forever already. That has happened really in the bear market. I mean, that's happened in the last year and a half. So why is it mainly PulseX for you? And do you ever, I know you're not a short-term guy, but do you ever kind of, look at ratios or maybe go back into some Pulse or Hex or anything? Or why is it that PulseX is what you are most bullish on?
Before you answer, thanks DJ and Moonboy for the 1999. Go ahead, Frank.
Very good question. I think my answer is pretty boring. The way that I'm going to answer it's not anything special. There's a combination of about 3 things as to why I did all PulseX, right? Maybe 4. 1, the deflationary is very similar to my world of stock buybacks. Just very simple, right? I like the idea of it. It's very, very simple. 2, and this is a little bit more complicated, but it's the one that makes the most sense to me. To me, I understand what Bitcoin is. I'm like Michael Saylor. I understand the problem that it solved, right? But it's way too late for me to make substantial like wealth. I would have to wait 20 years to do so. So it's not worth it to me to buy Bitcoin. So then what's the next big option? Okay, well, that's when I discovered Hex. Hex is the second best option right now when it comes to buying something like Bitcoin. And it is the best option to buy it when the mainstream media hasn't caught on to it, right? So I was like, okay, well, Hex is, the thing that's going to operate the same philosophy as Bitcoin. And I can buy it right now this early on. Well, I'm going to go ahead and start looking in that direction. Now, part 2 of that is, okay, well, Hex has been out for 5 years now. And can I make great returns on it? Fantastic. Yeah, I can. But if there's liquidity tied to PulseChain and PulseX, meaning if Hex succeeds, PulseX is going to succeed, well, then I can make substantial more returns by simply holding PulseX because it's newer. It's just been out for 600 days. Mm-hmm. Because if Hex succeeds, then PulseX is going to succeed because they're tied together through liquidity, right? So Hex already has been proven through one cycle and now going on to the second cycle that it's going to be here to stay. It's a community behind it. The philosophy is the same as Bitcoin. This is just simply, okay, well, I can buy an asset that's only been out from day one, and I can get greater returns, right? Because if I buy Hex now, I'm buying it 100x above the low. But if I buy PulseX, I'm buying it 10x below SAC. And they carry the exact same principles of DeFi. The only difference is the ticker and a little bit of the tokenomics, right? But the philosophy and the ideology behind DeFi, they're both the exact same. Mm-hmm. And then it goes to like part 3 of that is I like simplicity. I don't want to have to, do I rotate between PulseChain, PulseX, and Hex? I don't want to be doing that. Like I used to be a trader. That's not the world that I want to go back to. I just want to buy one thing, hold it into, my cold storage wallet over several wallets, and then go enjoy my day job. And then just let time do its thing. And not have to worry about, do I have to do a ratio trade back and forth? I use those as metrics to see the performance. Like I look at the ratio between PulseChain and PulseX and see how that's been doing over the past, year and a half. But I use it as a metric. And that is the form of investing. Now, people have asked me, is there a rotation plan in the future? Well, for sure, whenever I feel comfortable, I'm going to rotate a big portion into Hex and just do a 5-5-5. That to me is like, okay, long-term retirement plan.
Ewok will like the sound of that one. Yeah.
Yeah. So like I like to think about it as like you have the original generation, then you have my generation 5 years later, right? And then I like the Hex ideology and philosophy of yield. So I'm just going to rotate a portion of my PulseX profits, put it into a 5-5-5, and continue on with my life, right? And then another portion of that could be, let's say 10%, 20%. I could put it into a PulseX PulseChain farm, and then that's my active yield. Because you have your locked up yield, which is your 5-5-5, you can't access that yield. But then you have a liquidity farm that you can be your active yield. You can live off of that. So it's the perfect combination of everything. I have my 5-5-5 stake, which is your long-term retirement plan. You have your liquidity pool through yield farming, which is your active yield, which could be your equivalent of like your rental property. And then you have your long-term holding, which is Hex, which is PulseX for me, was my baby is what I call it. And then that produced the other forms of income and other forms of investment through that same economical power. And I don't have to go and manage people's real estate and get the same benefits as that. That's the big thing about it. So like my 5-5-5 stake is my 401k. It's an annual contribution. It produces yield, and I can't touch it till I'm 55. Okay. Well, then my liquidity farm is my rental property. It's producing me active yield every month, and if I decide to sell it because I need it, I can touch it. Right? It's not locked up. And then I have my main baby, which is what I consider my business, PulseX. That's the one that made everything happen, and then you kind of just diversify out. That's literally how I view things. It's very simple. It's very boring. It's not complicated, but it's what works for me.